Hi, hi everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're here for our very last session of the year, and this is a little bit of a different format that we have today. So we have a few speakers, a few presenters, so something of a panel, but really a roundtable discussion around the future of care work. And the people who are here today basically came together to discuss this at a CSEW 2021 workshop. And the goal of this workshop was really to highlight the broader social, political, and economic systems that shape care work and the emerging technologies being used in it. And what we'll do today is um, I just introduced the topic and I told you a little bit about the care workshop, but we'll learn much more about the different perspectives that went into this workshop. So we had about 70 participants, which was quite amazing. It was really interesting to see the different perspectives that people brought. So a few of us were talking about it from the healthcare perspective, but then there were also others who brought perspectives from, say, activism and such. And so it was really great. We did not expect to see that kind of a response to the topic, and we're really excited to continue conversations. So with all of you. So today, Helena Mentis, also here, also one of the GPCs, will be also helping out with just the moderation as we get started. And at this point, I'm going to ask Azra, who is one of the lead organizers, to share a summary graphic of the workshop topics. So Azra, I think you need to have co-host permissions, right? Or do you already have?
I think so. Let me try sharing my screen. Okay, yeah, I think I can.
Okay, cool. So go ahead.
Yeah, so can you all see the screen with the graphic? Okay, yes. And it's also what I've put in my background just to let people kind of explore that during the call as well. But like Neha mentioned, the care workshop, we had a diversity of perspectives represented. We had domains, everything from kind of core health work, but also domestic work, home health aides, elderly care, education, social media, accessibility, parenting, and also sort of thinking about what care means in terms of activist work, in asylum decision making, and in terms of carceral care. Like, what does it mean to be? Are these really caring, and what are the sort of the complications when you think about it in terms of care? And then, of course, there were many kinds of technologies that were associated with these different domains. So we had platforms for gig work and for HR, as well as social media platforms. A lot of work also on more sort of automated systems like chatbots and voice assistants, such as for elderly care and for health workers. And I think what was really great was that during the workshop, we were really able to explore the challenges associated with these different platforms and domains. So surveillance, of course, was a big one when it came to platforms and different kinds of technologies for such as voice assistants and chatbots. Then kind of the lack of autonomy in having to use these kinds of platforms and having to engage in care at all. The commodification of care work, such as for domestic work and home care aides, when they're on such platforms, the possibility of labor exploitation and the lack of laws pertaining to labor in these different domains, and the invisibility of work and what that means in terms of the economic devaluation as well as the social devaluation of care. And these kinds of challenges and domains led us to ask different questions of what role could design play in these different scenarios, and how should we think about going about design in these different kinds of situations. So that brought us to different kinds of design approaches like participatory design and co-design, thinking about assets-based design and in relation to these different kinds of domains, many different kinds of feminist perspectives. So thinking about intersectional perspectives and kind of drawing from Black feminist thought and also from other feminist scholars of color, thinking about the feminist political economy, work on materiality and on feminist ethics of care, so a range of different approaches there. A lot of conversations also centered around collaborative and relational approaches to thinking about care work. And then there was also work on thinking about privacy and anthropomorphism and the role that has in terms of how we think about care and configure care relationships in different settings. So that's hopefully a quick overview, and you can continue to kind of explore these connections in the graphic in my background. So I'm gonna stop sharing.
Cool. Thank you. I think that's really creative that we can zoom in on you and look at the background behind your face. All right. So thank you, Azra. And we'll do individual introductions now. So Naveena, why don't you go next?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm a PhD student at University of Washington. I'm studying how emerging technologies have shaped care work in parts of India and Kenya, especially looking at in the past community health and nursing work and forms of telehealth, so particularly help desks or chatbots. I'm interested in understanding the relationship between the design of socio-technical systems and how we value care work, and how the role of design and valuing care work in that context, and how they relate to and importantly, I think, unsettle the power dynamics in health and global development. And these might include, say, neoliberal health policies or the exploitation of women and their marginality for both unpaid and paid care work.
Thanks, Naveena. Cella, you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Cella Sum, and I'm a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University's Human-Computer Interaction Institute. And I'm broadly interested in examining the politics of care with technology and design for care work as it relates to labor, disability, transnationalism, and global capitalism. And this includes right now looking into technologies for home care and how they're being used as tools for surveillance and control on care workers and disabled people. And also looking into US-based immigrant and refugee community-based organizations and how they navigate increased corporatization of health and social service systems while using technologies to cultivate digital care networks as part of their own imaginative process towards justice.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I recently graduated from a master's program at University of Oxford's Sociology Department. And I'm currently the research assistant for the Social Media Collective, which is a group of social scientists at Microsoft Research New England. And I'm very broadly interested in how new technologies are changing care work, and then how in turn our existing crisis of care is shaping the development of those new technologies. My current project centers on Amazon's Alexa and the relationship that users have between anthropomorphism, trustworthiness, and surveillance. I used in-depth interviews, and I'm currently working on a paper with my advisor, Dr. Ekaterina Hertog, which kind of examines how anthropomorphism can function as a protective layer between the device that many of the users see is integrated seamlessly into their daily lives, and the company that many of them vehemently dislike and mistrust. And then I also just finished a project on platform care workers and actually looking at profiles on care.com and how workers communicate trustworthiness and are rendered visible and less visible by the search algorithms. And very excited to be here.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Anthony?
Good morning. My name is Anthony. I'm at Cornell Tech. I work with home care workers, which are care workers in themselves, and that they provide care services for patients inside their own homes. But my work specifically focuses on enabling these home care workers to care for each other, in that I'm looking to design technologies that enable virtual peer support communities, virtual communities of practice to form between care workers. And that's sort of the overall gist of my work, which is hopefully trying to create communities that allow people to support each other. I don't have a paper yet. That's in submission. Anything else I should mention?
I think that's good. Thank you. Melissa.
Hi all, I'm Melissa. I'm a PhD student in Spain, in Barcelona. I am doing my research as part of a big European project called Plus. Plus is platform labor in urban spaces. We have been doing research these last 3 years in 4 different sectors: food delivery, the taxi services, and Airbnb and short-term rental platforms. And also as part of this research enters the domestic and care work sector. So as part of this research, I've been doing a case study of HelpLink in Berlin. I've been doing also a case study here in Barcelona. And now I'm joining as a resident researcher Suara, which is a big platform cooperative, which they are trying to, basically, they are trying to digitalize, and they want researchers to help them go through this process. My PhD is centered on studying working conditions within the platform economy, differentiating the different models. So also studying platform cooperatives, as I said. And basically also just going through the whole neoliberal discourse of flexibilization and just trying to confront it. That's it.
Thanks, Melissa. Ambika?
Hi, everyone. I'm joining from India in New Delhi. I'm a researcher at the Center for Internet and Society, where I study the impact of technology broadly on social inequality, but specifically around gender. And I've been looking at women's work in the digital economy for about 2.5 years now, looking at questions around surveillance, privacy as well, in addition to that of labor. But the sort of insights I bring to this space is from a project that we are in the process of completing and have been doing so for about 2 years, looking at digital platforms in India that sort of act as recruiters or intermediaries for domestic and care workers.
Thanks, Ambika. And I think we have one more introduction from Abhishek.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining my colleague Ambika here from the Center for Internet and Society in India, where we broadly study the impact of digital platforms on labor cultures in sectors like taxi driving, mobility, ride delivery, healthcare, edtech, etc. But more specifically, right now we're engaged in a project that tries to understand the impact that platforms are having on women's work, in particularly sectors like domestic and care work. But more broadly, I'm interested in exploring questions that lie at the intersections of gender politics, urbanization, and informality. Look forward to the discussion with everyone.
Thanks, Abhishek. And I just realized that Azra, you've not introduced yourself, so maybe you could do that.
Sure. I'll try to make it quick. So I'm Azra Ismail. I'm a PhD student at Georgia Tech, working with Neha actually. And my work focuses on the design of automated and data-driven systems in frontline health. I'm particularly interested in who and on what institutions the role of care work falls upon, and the role that tech platforms and the way the economy is configured has to play in the valuing and devaluing of care labor.
Thank you. And then Helena, would you like to introduce yourself just from the perspective of your engagement with care work and the future of care work, since you're part of the speaking team here?
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Helena Mentis. I'm University of Maryland, Baltimore County on a normal day. This is not a normal day as I'm on sabbatical, and I'm at University of Copenhagen in Denmark right now. The reason that I guess I stood up and said I'd be happy to support this talk today is that I'm actually here in Copenhagen looking at what constitutes good care, particularly for those that fall out of normal care. And this is traditionally in the range of healthcare. I'm actually really highly motivated by Anne-Marie Moll's characterization of care in comparison to choice. And so that's actually the lens that I'm looking at this along with some of my colleagues, looking at across culture comparison of care versus choice. Excited to hear everybody else.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I will quickly just mention that I don't think I introduced myself. So I'm Neha Kumar, and I'm faculty at Georgia Tech. And a lot of the work that that my lab does, or that my students have been leading, is around care work, looking at some of the questions that Azra talked about, but also looking at caregivers and technologies that support caregiving, looking at various contexts of health and specifically stigmatized health context. So things like mental health and technology-mediated mental health support and such. So this workshop really touched on many different topics that I'm interested in. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Also, I just wanted to mention, if you want to put your intro in the chat, just to say what your positionality might be in the context of the discussion, even if you're not one of the invited participants, please feel free to do so. What we're going to do today is go through a few questions that we had listed together as we were planning this session. But also, if you have questions, we might skip ahead to those. So feel free to write down anything that you've been thinking about. And what else? Yeah, so when I ask these questions, I don't really want to be the one kind of calling people out. So what I'm going to do is just ask you to raise your hand, and I will just go in the order of raised hands. So the first question that we had noted was just what counts as care work and why should we look at care work? And I guess it would be helpful to characterize the we. So let's assume that we here are HCI, CSCW researchers, looking at care work and specifically the future of care work. So who would like to take a stab at that first? And since we agreed on the questions together, I'm assuming that we've definitely talked about these. Okay, so Anthony, why don't you go first?
Sure. I mean, care work is like the work that is in service of and providing for others. And so, I think about it in terms of my own work. These home care workers that I work with are definitely care workers in that they provide service to others despite the fact that they are paid. And then, the work that I do in terms of creating this environment for them to care for each other is also care work, in the sense that they allow the care that they provide for each other is also care work, in the terms of informational support for them to do their job, emotional support for the difficulties of their job. And the question is, whether or not the research that I do is care work is another question, which I'm not sure I feel comfortable to say myself that it is care work, but but it's also in service of home care workers themselves. There's some definitions of care work involve whether or not it's intrinsically motivated, whether there's an economic motivation involved, and so there's a question of whether or not, and this is something that I hear from many of my participants. They say frequently that in order to be a home care worker, you have to have your head in the right space. It can't be for just money, but they do get paid, and so I guess the question of how much people do need to eat, how much something being the economics of it influence whether or not it is care work is, I think, an interesting question as well. That's all I have to say.
Cella?
Yeah, I think initially it's good to think about what care work typically is recognized as, and taking on like a very neoliberal capitalistic definition. So usually these are things kind of dictated by the state and limited to things like childcare, elder care, caring for disabled people. And this type of narrative is inherently transactional, right? So it's delineating between care recipient and caregiver, and kind of promotes this deficiency model, or a charity model, right, of who's deserving of care and who carries the burden of giving it. And activists have, taken on a much broader, more radical approach to care work, and it includes a collective responsibility, right? And it shouldn't be treated as a burden, but it should include things like joy, mutualism, interdependence. And, this was a reflection of our workshop too, in that we had so many people in different domains, right? Care work isn't, just siloed into like healthcare contexts. Care work is done by teachers, it's done by tech workers. And we're seeing that, work happening with, resistance efforts and activism and unionization. And so I want to include that as our definition of care work as well.
Thank you. And Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think since you guys both defined care work very beautifully, I think I will address the second part of the question, which is why should we look at care work? And I think one thing that I think about a lot is the fact that care work is, as scholar Nancy Fraser says, in crisis currently. There's this crisis of care, a deficit, and that plays out in things like a shortage of workers in elder care, in nursing, for example, in teaching right now, especially with COVID. But this was a problem that existed, of course, before COVID. COVID has just worsened the crisis. And I think this is particularly intense in the US. And in the US crisis of care, the US is not the only country that has a crisis of care, but the US crisis of care spills out into many other countries. Barbara Ehrenreich and Arlie Hochschild talk about this notion of global care chains in which the care deficit in the US is addressed by a flow of migrants from the global South who come to fill positions as childcare workers, home care workers, et cetera, and then in turn leave a care deficit. There's a care deficit in the countries that they are migrating from, and they need to pay care workers to come in and take care of their children, family members who are being left behind. So I think that part of the reason that it's so important for us to look at care work because it is something that is sorely lacking in our society and in many other countries as well. And I think the solution to this is not the kind of market-focused solution that many tech companies are advocating for, but as Cella said, looking at something that looks more at mutuality, interdependence.
Thank you. Azra.
Yeah, so I guess like one point I just wanted to make is that what counts as care work is also, I think, frequently tied to who is doing this care work, right? And how that's valued. Like we frequently kind of club together the work that is seen as either like women's work or work that's frequently done by women of color, or like in India, for instance, where people from lower castes, like these are all the kinds of work that we kind of club together as like work that's unskilled and kind of is sort of like care work, right? And that's work, so therefore we do not need to pay well, or that should be done for like the intrinsic value that it has. So I think there's some like social political implications also of what we decide to kind of categorize as care work versus what is kind of seen as skilled labor. And you kind of see this in health sector all the time, where you have like medical professionals, for instance, versus nurses, and the way that's valued both by institutions as well as those receiving care is very different. So that was just kind of one aspect that I wanted to briefly mention, because this is, I think, something that ties into everything that all of us are doing, right? Like the people who are engaged in this kind of work and what it means for them just because of who they are.
Thanks, Azra. Naveena?
I really appreciate everyone's definitions and comments so far. And I guess one thing I just want to add is also thinking about what caring relationships are between. So often it is between people, but sometimes it can also be for environments, like it could be physical environments, it could be for communities. And I mean, considering the context of climate change, that's like a really important conversation. And also it can be for institutions, and this can be very non-innocent. For example, I've been reading about how we could frame the work of ethicists, for example, in organizations as a form of care for the work that institution is doing. And, if you think about, recent firings of AI ethicists, you see that pattern recreated where that work is not valued or is controlled in specific ways.
Thank you. Cella, did you want to add to this question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, typically, like jumping off of what Naveena said, that typically like the narratives of care have typically been, positive or about like, relationships, but care is also coercive and carceral. And I think it's also reflective of, the devaluing of people, right? And so it's not always looked at as a good thing. And so I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for offering such a diverse set of thoughts. Should we move on to the next question, maybe? I think, or we can come back to this. So we were going to talk also about HCI and CSCW and how they have looked at care work thus far and what these fields have not looked at. So that's our next question. And maybe while we're thinking about that question, Ambika, if you wanted to, I saw your hand just now, sorry. So go ahead.
Yeah, just a really quick point about, I think the way people have been talking about care work has also been sort of along two binaries of paid and unpaid. And I think there's a lot of ways in which the way that the histories of both have shaped up have been quite similar and impact the way that, for example, paid work being devalued along the type of work, being performed inside the home, etc., being sort of treated as outside the domain of productive work, quote unquote. That also stems from the way it's treated as sort of natural work being performed by women, by migrants, oppressed classes, etc. And those sort of shape also the way that, talking about the second question, I think it also shapes the way that the sector sort of interacts with processes of platformization, of workplace surveillance, for example, becomes completely different when you're looking at it in the context of care relationships, because those are not the history of that, and having been outside the framework of legal protection implies that it's quite specific, and it's not going to be enough to sort of understand these processes broadly. You have to sort of narrow down into looking at power within that relationship, and the fact that it's also an emotional, it's emotional work. It has more that sort of the commodification of that is also something that shapes the way that platformization is sort of interacting with it now.
Thanks, Ambika. And we can probably, I think we've started to answer this question that I mentioned of how has HCI looked at care work and what has HCI not looked at, but would anyone like to address this directly? Okay, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'll say first that I'm not in HCI specifically, I'm in sociology. So I think coming from kind of an outsider perspective, one thing that I would love to see more from the HCI literature, at least that I have read, is more engagement with, as Ambika just mentioned, like the history of care work, the history of the way that care work, both paid and unpaid, and exploring the boundary between those two has changed over the years, like just thinking about the example of the family wage and the institution of the family wage as this thing that very firmly separated the public from the private sphere and really characterized this unpaid work that happened at the home that before was much more intertwined with, especially in Europe and the US, very intertwined with like cottage industries and work that was generating some sort of commodity was happening in the home. But now the home is like seen as this space for women, this naturalized space where work doesn't actually happen. Work happens during the waged workday, and the worker, who is presumed to be a man, is able to take home enough pay to support the whole family. And of course, that was not the reality for many, many people, especially people of color, working class people were not able to survive solely on this kind of idealized family wage. But that idea, I think, is really enduring. And the kind of breakdown of the family wage, I think, has really shaped the way that we think about care work and everything that encompasses that, both paid and unpaid today. So I would love to see more kind of critical engagement with that and many other histories of the way that care work has changed and interacted with technology over time.
And we see that discussion, I think, with a lot of technologies, just like, more attention needs to be given to the history of sex. Thanks, Elizabeth. Melissa, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks. The other day when we were like trying to decide, the final questions, I left like thinking, okay, what's really care work? And it's also the same. I don't came from human-computer interaction. I'm also a sociologist. I'm basically studying how organizations differ between them. So I was like more kind of seeing, we are here like trying to define care as something radical. Like the title, it's this one. But at the same time, when we are defining here care, I don't find it like radical. So I think why I think it happens, I think human-computer interaction researchers need to connect more with sociologists, other kind of researchers, and really work collaboratively in the sense of the perspective of care, for instance, could be seen as everything that is related just to sustain life. In this regard, no? So it will be like something much broader than the idea of what we are like more or less kind of defining here. And connected to this, then it's so how basically human-computer interaction, it's working kind of alone, no, not in relation with, sometimes. And also another aspect is that I'm missing now when getting into this literature, which I'm kind of starting now, is I really find like there's not that much emphasis into intersectionality. I find like there's still too much work, like to integrate all this field of feminist researchers from intersectional perspective into the literature of human-computer interaction. This is like one of the things.
Thanks, Melissa. I like what you said about sustaining life and the work that goes into that. Anthony?
Yeah, I'll come from a slightly different perspective, and so at risk of stating the obvious, a lot of the work that is in my subfield, which is HCI for development or technology for development, a lot of that you could potentially consider care work, simply because it either involves care workers or in the service of care workers. But to echo Elizabeth and Melissa a bit, a lot of it is not really framed in that kind of way, and it's not framed in any sort of history critical scholarship around care work, around feminist literature of care, or around concepts like intersectionality and so forth. So definitely I agree that a lot of this literature kind of stands in a bubble, that it could do a better job of really connecting with other bodies of work.
Thanks for pointing that out. Abhishek?
Thank you, everyone, for those very provocative thoughts. I just like to put something on the table, which I think is less explored, which is this relationship between the politics of care and space itself. So care is usually looked at in a very spatially bound context of the home, right? But in our cities where I come from, the home is not spatially bound. There is a very porous relationship between what constitutes the home and what constitutes the outside. And care is not generally organized individually or even within the household, but at the community level. So it kind of depends on a lot of factors about how the community and the neighborhood is designed, what kind of service access and what kind of security of tenure, and what kind of other kinds of services and infrastructures are available to people at the community level to be able to organize care work within the household and within the community. So I'd just like to put that out there as well.
Thank you, Abhishek. Cella?
Yeah, I just wanted to end that I think HCI, especially as a field, has really focused on looking at care and care work within the medical model, right? And so really working with medical institutions, doctors, and not really focusing on the people on the ground, right? And they're also really focused on efficiency and innovation, right? They don't really value things like sustainability or community. And this is, I think within the last few years, HCI has definitely grown in surfacing some of these critiques, right? But I wanted to honor what other people have been saying, and that, there is an honoring of history and interdisciplinary disciplines that really ties in with the work that we're doing and how we have an understanding of how technologies are being used in care work. So with the work that I'm specifically doing, I'm really interested in looking into how, the care economy is tied with migration, right? And a long history of US colonialism and imperialism. And this is reflective of why the majority of domestic workers are women of color, immigrants, and a distributed workforce who are doing, invisible work. And that's part of why they, they have an invisible status already.
Thank you, Cella and Azra.
Yeah, I think all the points raised so far are, totally what I've observed as well. I think that historical analysis is something that we could definitely use more of, and it's something that we should be hopefully seeing more of because of the workshop and because of conversations like this. I think the other piece is also that I've frequently seen a gap between contemporary conversations around how do we kind of think about tech platforms, and how do we think about policy around protecting workers, and around kind of making sure that workers are getting the kind of compensation that they deserve, and those kinds of conversations frequently do not. I'm sorry, there's a car that went off. But yeah, so those conversations I frequently see as disconnected between what's happening within the HCI sphere. So I think I would love to see more spaces really where these kinds of groups can connect, because our conversations with these communities tends to be defined in terms of, how can we do design work for so-and-so tech that so-and-so community wants to use. It doesn't go beyond how can we advocate for these workers? How can we advocate for this community that's already working to support these, providing care for these workers, right? And also thinking about how can, I think as many of us with connections to tech do have some power in terms of helping support conversations in this space. Unfortunately, that's just, I think we're in the time where tech has some discursive power, especially in the policy domain. And I think we should think about how can we, in our different positions of power, be doing more to support various movements that are already happening. So those are just some thoughts that I've been personally grappling with in my own work.
Thanks, Azra. I'm wondering if we could pause for a moment and invite one of our participants or in the audience to share as well. So Alex, I see you have a thought in the chat. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I think that just to explain my comment, I've found that in a few of the papers that I've read on care work, there's this attempt to get a so-called holistic impression of the workplace by interviewing and doing participatory design activities with both workers and management, while at the same time kind of synthesizing that into a conclusion that is supposed to benefit all parties through using technology that will somehow either equalize or increase like worker voice. But I guess from like a labor organizing perspective, I understand that that's not possible, right? Like, and the originators of participatory design in Scandinavia in the 70s believed that too, like that there is no compromise in that way. And although they tried to do participatory design in a way that they felt was best representing and uplifting through worker control of the research, they also 50 years ago recognized that that's not possible. So I think, again, like the history, not just of care work, but also of our methods and how we choose to do research, I think is important.
Thank you. And Melissa, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Everything you were saying, like it connects with two aspects that I was finding in my research. First, like when I was like, like starting this research with this big cooperative in Spain, is one of the biggest cooperatives. So imagine they have been just operating in the country for more than 40 years. And the problem was not really, okay, let's, gather enough money just to build this technological platform. That's not the problem. The problem behind it, it's okay, if you want to compete into the market, you really have to lower costs down. And the reality is that these costs just don't go hand in hand with just fulfillment with with labor law, So it was like kind of, okay, we are just saying this amount of platforms who are entering the market, you basically just don't run labor rights. And if we want to compete, we have to do the same. The problem is not technology, they told me, like we can develop a platform from today to tomorrow. That's not the problem. The problem is not this. The problem is, okay, how we do that, just preserving labor rights and competing in a market which, it's not fair. So I that's why I really think, okay, we can design new technologies, we can just help.
I'm just listening.
Okay. We can we can also like kind of find whether or if we want to automate kind of the process to lower down costs, etc. But this has to go hand in hand with just preserving all the labor rights, fostering collective action, etc. If we don't do that, then the discourse of just, okay, let's build participatory technologies, etc. will not make sense. Like it's my view. And just one last thing, this also connects with the discourses of platforms regarding formalization and also the visibilization of work. If we are only researching the work which is visible, so the one in hospitals, etc., or the one even which we consider included now into this kind of into the system, so the work doing at the home, we are missing part of the enormous of the big definition of what's care work. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Melissa. And Anthony had a comment, I think, after Alex shared, saying, I do this kind of work too, doing participatory design and hoping to support worker voice. But I definitely agree that there's no objectivism or holism in it. You bring politics into the field, then it's better to explicitly align with the politics of workers rather than pretend that you can create an apolitical stance or environment in which the research can be done. And in the spirit of that, I guess it would be, if you want to drop a few words or lines into the chat, that would be great. Thanks, everybody. And this was the last session of this year. We're going to have more next year. And I think we'll be starting in January. We don't have a date yet, but it will be in the first half of January. And so you can check our website for details. Yeah, thank you.